A few times this year, but I'm Carrie Thomas. I'm the SIG grant coordinator over here at Kennedy, and of course
I'm Linda Bahe, of course, and assistant principal over at Roosevelt, which I know everybody here too.
As you know, we recently completed some learning walks over at Kennedy and at Roosevelt that were centered on objectives. And I don't know how many of you participated in those walks for objectives. Okay, so we got some people in here. And I was lucky enough to be able to participate in them at both buildings as well. So it was really fun to get to hear the discussion. One of the number one things that came out of that, though, was what are the expectations? So today, one of our goals, and this is one of our objectives, is we want to be able to identify the school-wide expectations for content objectives. When you walk out of here today, we want you to be able to say, and you're going to use this, STEM, I can identify the school-wide expectations for content objectives. The other thing that we heard from those learning walks is, how do we write objectives? So another objective we have for you today when you walk out is to be able to say, I can write objectives. Okay? Any questions about those two things? All right. So just a couple things. I do have the objectives also on my PowerPoint here because I wanted you to have them in your handout. If you don't know where you are going, you'll probably end up somewhere else. Hopefully you noticed we called our presentation today Teaching with Clarity. And so one of the things we really want to do for our students is be very deliberate and purposeful about what we are teaching them. And so we want to teach with clarity. Being in a classroom without knowing the direction for learning is similar to going on a trip, but not really knowing where you are going or why you're going. And so a lot of times we end up with confused students. And we want to try to eliminate that. One of the things that came out of the learning walks, a lot of people said, what do we call these things? And we noticed when we walked into a lot of rooms, there were learner objectives, learning objectives, language objectives, goals, targets. So I met with administration. We talked a lot about what do we need to do. And so we decided the common language that we're going to use for objectives is content objectives, because we're all content teachers. We want all of our kids to understand the content that we're covering. Now, some of you have had training and like to use language objectives as well. If you are comfortable and you want to continue using language objectives on top of content objectives, fine. But the minimum is all teachers in our building will be using content objectives. If you want to use goals, targets, learning objectives, that's all above and beyond. Does that make sense? Did that confuse you? Okay. So we're going to go back and we're just going to simplify it so we're all using a common language. So we need to first define what are content objectives. Stephen Covey says, begin with the end in mind. As a teacher, I need to know where do I need to take my students. So a content objective is the statement of what the learner will know and understand as a result of the instruction. Content objectives are to be content specific. If I'm teaching reading, it needs to be focused on reading. If I'm a Phi-Ed teacher, it needs to be focused on Phi-Ed. Each of us has different content areas that we cover with our students. The other thing is we want our content objectives to be based on those academic standards. That's what the state of Minnesota has set forth. We have them for all of our different content areas. What is the purpose of a content objective? Number one, you want to set the clear expectations for learning. What is it we're going to be learning about today? And I like this quote on the bottom. Go ahead and just read that either up here or on your handout. Okay, and that's by John Hattie. And Linda and I are going to talk about him in a little bit, but some of you maybe have seen this book, Visible Learning by John Hattie. But what I like about it here is he kind of reminds me as a teacher that if I can help set that clear expectation for learning, it can help free up students' minds so that they're able to actually concentrate on the content. It makes me think about sometimes when I've gone to listen to different presentations and speakers, sometimes I can't figure out what the point of the speaker is, and so I'm getting so distracted or frustrated as a learner when I'm listening to the speaker that I'm not really thinking about the content that they're trying to get by. So as a teacher, we want to be very deliberate and clear about that content that we're trying to deliver. So I like how John Hattie talks about that. He calls them learning intentions. Okay, and just some more quotes about content objectives, excuse me. Main goal is you want to be able to focus your lesson. You want to have a purpose, and you want your kids to know what is the purpose of our learning today. And bottom line, we're trying to make that learning as transparent for our students as possible.
I want you just to take a look because we know that as we might all use objectives differently. And I want you to take a look at teacher number 1 and read about how teacher number 2 uses them. And then I would like you just to do a think, pair, share with the person sitting next to you and talk about how you currently are using objectives in your classroom. Today, how are you using objectives? So just take a few moments and do that. Okay, let's just pull back together. I want to just share with you an example. It's a privilege to go into all these classrooms and be able to observe how different teachers are teaching and the different things they were using. And one of the places that this really hit home for me and really looking at how, you know what, they really referred back to their objective. I was in a kindergarten classroom. The kindergarten teacher had all of the students sitting in a circle on the floor, and she right away said, today we're going to talk about subtraction, and she was kind of talking about her objective, but was using pictures to do that. And then they proceeded and did an activity where they had their cubes and they took some away, and then they would talk through the activity. And then she'd stop and say, boys and girls, what are we learning about today? What are we talking about today? And again, we're talking about subtraction. Again, she referred back to her objective. They went on with another activity, and again, she'd stop and said, boys and girls, what are we talking about today? So in that kindergarten classroom, I know there were 3 times during instruction that she referred back to what are we talking about today, and then at the end revisited again. And by the time they were done, every student in there, if you were to ask them, what did you talk about, they would be able to tell you. Now, could they all do it perfectly maybe by the end? Maybe not, but they knew the direction that they were going. They knew they were focused on something. I think that's what the objective does, is it brings focus not only to you as teachers, but also to the kids who need that, so they can move ahead on the right path there. So, and I think you had an example too that...
Well, I was talking about how I'd been in a 5th grade room last year, and I was co-teaching with a 5th grade teacher during Reader's Workshop. And there was one day we were having this great discussion about the book that we had been reading and talking, and all of a sudden it dawned on me, I think we're getting a little off task here. We're going off on a bunny trail, and sometimes that happens. And so I was able to just look at the objective that we had hanging up. I said, boys and girls, let's just stop and think. How are we doing in relation? And all of a sudden they kind of, oh wait, and they realized we were getting off in the wrong direction with our learning. So even as a teacher for myself, having that objective posted helped remind me, okay, what is it that I have to help my students learn today? Because it's really easy, especially when your kids are engaged in like a book discussion, to just go off on some other tangent. So that was an example that I had. I wish I could tell you that just writing objectives and posting them up where your kids could see them would automatically raise your student achievement. I looked for that research, I could not find it. So I don't want to mislead anyone here. When you have objectives, you actually got to use them. That's how that's going to change your instruction, okay? So ways that you can use your objectives effectively. Number 1, share and discuss them. I didn't go into it in real detail with you today, but when I did pull these up today, I hope I did at least last time, I asked, does anyone have any questions? Or, I tried to ask you a little bit. Now, if I was in a classroom with students, I might use this as an opportunity to expand on some of the language I used in my objectives. This is a great place to introduce some academic language, especially that procedural language we use. We use fancy words like identify or determine or conclude. This would be a great place to just get a little language in there for your kids, move on, and then another day you might come back and use this word again. So it's a great way to expand their vocabularies. So you need to discuss, okay? Doesn't hurt to have your kids quick do a pair share. What are we going to learn about today, boys and girls? Tell your neighbor. Quick say it out loud. All of the tasks and activities that you include in your lesson, you always want to be thinking as you're planning, how does that relate to the objective? Is that going to lead us to the type of learning that I'm looking for of this content material? Also, and if you went to Bruce's session, he talked about formative assessment. But any formative assessment you do, whether it's written or oral or however you choose to do it, should be based on those objectives. That's clearly what I want my students to know today, okay? And the bottom one, I'm a former EL teacher, so I can never push enough language in there. But students need opportunities to talk about their learning. We have to think about now, our demographics have changed over the years, as you all know. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. But like 1 in 4 of our students at least is speaking another language at home. So we need to be thinking about how we can give them opportunities to practice that language. They're probably not going home and practicing it. So you need to think about what you can do. So the next few slides just give you some more ideas. Number 1, every teacher sitting in this room right now, you are a language teacher. Every content area that you teach has its own language. There's the language of science, the language of math, language of music. So think about, from that language perspective, what you can do to support those learners in your room. Again, by setting your objectives and using that language in there and helping your kids build that language about that content can really help. We're trying to get that gap closed, remember. So I've got some quotes here. A couple things I just wanted to highlight. Remember, acquiring a language is a process. Unfortunately, it doesn't happen overnight. Our kiddos are working really hard, but it's going to take several years before they are going to be fluent in their academic language. So we need to give them opportunities to have those academic conversations. And that's where sometimes too we talk about like having some sentence frames or some things like that I've seen teachers, they'll have their objectives and then they'll even add some frames to help their kids have conversations about what it is they're learning. Okay, this is where we're going to talk a little bit more about that John Hattie. This is a book that Cheryl had introduced to us. It's called Visible Learning by John Hattie. And I think Linda wanted to share some things.
Yeah, this actually is my favorite book. I read this on my way home from Colorado. It is awesome because you're always thinking, what can I do? What really makes a difference? When I'm doing this in my classroom, what really matters? And this has so many great ideas, and not only does it have those, but it ranks them. And they can tell you, they'll tell you, okay, if you use this, you know what? Typically, a student's going to grow 2.5 years using this technique in your classroom. And it has a lot of research behind it, but it is a great book. And so we have books over here, so I would encourage you, and you can share a little bit more about that, but very much you need to look at this book. And Teacher Clarity is right there as number 9, and maybe you can give a little bit more as far as the background on the...
Okay. So John Hattie, what he did is he took over at least 50,000 different studies of what teachers do in their classrooms or what happens in schools involving millions of students, and he started just trying to discern what has the biggest impact on student learning. And he looked at lots of different angles. He looked at home influences, student influences, school influences, teacher influences. One of the coolest things he found out is, guess what? Teachers matter. So that's good job security for us. What you do in your classrooms does matter, so that's important, okay? The other thing I think that is exciting, he said, is almost everything you do with your students as a teacher has a positive effect on them, okay? So that's good news. But what's even better news is he goes through and he actually ranks them, like Linda said. He made a list, I think, from about 1 to 140 of things that teachers can do with their students. Well, it isn't just teachers, it's home influences and other things. But things that can impact student learning, and he ranked them for us so that we can know not only could I maybe do something that has a positive effect, I can actually look for some things that maybe even have more of a positive effect. This is just a little excerpt from his list. At the bottom, I wrote an effect size of 0.40 is typical. If you read the book, you can get into the technical pieces of what an effect size is. Basically what it is it's a way that John Hattie and other researchers use to be able to compare things. They had to come up with a way to measure the impact that it had. So they talk about effect sizes.
And then they use the visuals, which I like in here because everything like this is clarity. This will be the one on clarity, and obviously straight up and down that means that's just kind of an average of what a student might do in a year. It even has reverse things, some things that might be happening that would reverse some learning. But as you can see, teacher clarity is going to be more than a year, as far as almost 2 years actually, if we use that appropriately, as we talked about, and you mentioned earlier that these are things we can use, but we need to make sure that we're really implementing them in a very appropriate way so that we do see that growth.
So at the bottom I put a little note that a 0.40 is a typical year's growth. Well, we know we need to close our achievement gap, so we're going to be a little more aggressive than that. So that's why I like to look at this book and see what strategies could I get more than a year's growth. And here's just some examples. Number 1 on here was self-reported grades and student expectations. There was a 1.44. That's like 2.5 years growth. If you were doing it well, you'd have to research what that would look like. But number 9 on his list was teacher clarity. It's a 0.75. That's almost 2 years worth of growth. If I could just be a little more clear about what I was teaching and making sure that my students were clear about what they were learning, there is the potential to kind of get that gap closed. Okay, so we wanted to share that with you today.
As you know, and you're being observed in all of the evaluations that are taking place, at the end of the year, you will also be evaluating yourself using rubrics, and this is one of the things you'll be evaluating yourself on, would be like the objective piece, the goals that we're doing. And I just want you to realize that run over here would mean that, these people are beginning lessons without giving any sense of where the instruction is going. They would rate themselves a 1, or administrators would rate you as a 1. And again, here you're telling them what you're going to be learning today, and here you're posting it. Our goal is that we want people to be in the effective great if we can be over at 4 where we're actually doing some essential questions and we're doing some other pieces with it. That's great. But the goal is to be right here where we are posting our objectives in our classroom. So just be aware that all of this does tie into you evaluating yourselves and also you being evaluated. We don't want anything to come up as a surprise at the end. So we wanted to make sure that we got that piece to you today. Then talking about what are our expectations. These are our expectations. All teachers who teach reading and math are expected to post an objective in their room. Now, if you teach other subjects and you want to post them, great. That's great. We want you to be doing that. But this is the basic. You must do reading, you must do math. Now, if you are a teacher who has another area, say you're a Phi Ed teacher, let's say that you are a music teacher or EL, special ed, you still are required to post objectives that somehow relate to either math or reading. Now, we are fortunate that I know Phi Ed department has done a phenomenal job of doing that, and I've seen them in action, and they are looking at the standards that you're using in your classroom, and they're using those also. But we want kids to see that, you know what, and again, our research in here will tell you that kids need to see that we don't just talk about math in math class. That application is what we can have happen in those other content areas. So kids see that, you know what, whether we're in music or tech, Phi Ed, wherever we are, we can apply that to math, and we can also apply those things to reading. So we're fortunate that we already have that underway here. But just so that you know that, again, if they want to do their Phi Ed or music content standard on top of that, that's great. But again, what's required is that we want to have math or reading in all areas. Another expectation is that it is placed in a visible place. We want them placed where you can refer to them at the beginning of the lesson, be teaching, refer to them again throughout the lesson. So what does this mean about smart boards? Can you have it on your smart board? Yes, but you must also have it someplace else, because we need to have it visible so you can keep referring back to it. So that's the expectation. I know there's been some confusion on what's really expected, and I think we just got to a point where we thought, okay, we need to really set some expectations so you know. And that's what we heard from you. Just tell us, what do you want us to do? So today we're telling you, you need to have objectives for math and reading, and they need to be posted in your room, and you need to be referring to them throughout your teaching. Those are the expectations for you. So by the time you leave today, again, we want you to be able to identify these expectations and be able to write objectives. Those are our goals for today, or objectives for today.
All right, just some examples of posting them. Obviously, you'll need to find a way. One of the things that came up during learning walks is, do we all need to post them exactly the same way? And at this point, administration is saying no. It's okay if it looks different in different rooms, as long as it's very, very visible. It should be very easy to find if we walk, not just we, but anyone walks into your room, and they should be able to locate your objectives fairly quickly. Here's just some examples. The first one is a pocket chart, and they just listed their different content areas. We also talked about in the other session, if you were a Phi Ed or a music teacher who sees multiple grade levels, and I know Phi Ed gets tricky, you'll have to work with your team and decide what could work. But maybe instead of content areas, I might list my grade levels there and say kindergarten, first grade, second grade, this is what we're going to work on. I don't know. The second one is a whiteboard, and there they just got a little fancy. It looks like they took some tape, marked off some sections, and they have their different content areas, so they could just write it on their whiteboard. This is what I used, and this is recycled. But, just a little chart like this. It says today, and I had little Velcro stickers. I didn't make one that said our session, sorry. But if I was teaching math, I just stuck that on, and I could put my math objective. I also had it on a hanger because what we would do is a lot of times we would start, like in second grade when I worked with Amber, we would always start over on the carpet, and we would hang this up on the easel, and the kids were all close to us. But then sometimes when the kids went off to go read, we spread out the room. So then this was portable, so we could move it around the room or hang it up front so kids could see it. Okay, so just some ideas of how you could post them. Another idea that somebody else had, Tom Meyer went up to Moorhead, and they were using theirs. And what they did is they had all their objectives in a binder. This is a third grade one. And so their objectives are all in here. They kept the binder right by the board, and the teacher each day could just take them out. And so you'll just have to come up with your own system, and I'm sure a lot of you already do have systems. Make sure you're sharing those or asking questions and finding out maybe what works. Because I know a lot of us have been putting them on just smart boards at this point, but obviously the expectation has changed now that we need to have them up in our classrooms too.
And I know a title teacher's EL, when they're pushing in, one thing I've seen too is they've done a similar thing like this, and they maybe have the plastic sheets, they put their standards in there, and before they start with their group of students, they take their standard out, put it on the table, talk about, you know, or their objective for that day, talk about what they're going to be doing, and leave it there, and then revisit it, you know, during and at the end, and then put it back in their notebook, because they might not really need that objective till the next day. But that's what I've seen, people who are pushing in small groups, how they've seen them use those, and be able to still stay focused with the objectives with the kids.
Any other questions quick before we move on?
How about for, we were talking first grade, say reading.
Mhm.
We might talk about 5
Yep.
different things.
Good question. In kindergarten too, they ask that, you know, every
Right.
15 minutes you're switching
Right.
topics. I think what we talked about probably would work best is usually you're kind of got a standard that you're working on. We want these to be standards based, so kind of choose that main standard that you're focusing on, and that's what your objective will be about. Does that?
And I think once we talk through about how we're going to be writing these content objectives, I think that might clarify some of those
So
things
just
for
choose
you.
one of all of them.
Right. And I think once we go through that process, you might see how you can maybe break that up a little bit.
Okay.
Well, I think what we're saying, and I think what we need to make sure is right now we're going to focus on math and reading. Those are the two things. If you want to do other standards and have those objectives posted for those standards, you can. But what we're going to be looking at, and Carrie's going to lead you through in just a moment, is looking at a standard and how are you going to write objectives to go with that. And it is okay to have several different objectives for your day. That is okay. And I think once we kind of, we'll just work through this, and then after that, if you still have questions, I think that might, I'm just thinking this process might help you a little bit.
Okay.
Okay?
All right, so let's try to talk about writing objectives here. Just as you noticed there, Joe, all teachers, we're going to use can do. Part of it is we're a priority and a focus school here, and we kind of want to adopt this can do attitude in our students. You know, we want to get that gap closed. We're also kind of thinking about our ELL has new standards for English language development, and you'll be seeing more of these over the next couple of years as they start to transfer out into the mainstream. But one of the things that WIDA, if you ever hear your ELL teachers talk about WIDA standards, they're talking about the English language development standards. One of the things that they do is they have these can-do descriptors, and this book, it's not comprehensive, but it just kind of gives you a little continuum of what students can do at different proficiency levels. Don't worry, don't lose me here, because I'm not expecting you to write 50 objectives. I just wanted to show you this, that this is showing us opportunities or things I can do with my students at different levels and be a way to differentiate. But they're called can do because we really want all of our kids to know that they can learn, okay? So we're going to use can do statements for our content objectives. Examples, and they would start with I can, and you'll see all the objectives we posted around the room today all start with I can. I can retell a story, I can find the perimeter of a polygon, okay? And the reason we're going to shift it is it's taking that off of us as the teachers of what I'm going to teach, and we really want to push it to what the students are learning. And we want those students to take responsibility for what they're learning. We want them to be able to articulate what they're learning. So we're going to use the I can statements, and that'll be consistent. Some of you have been through training with me before on objectives, and you'll notice all my presentations have been different. It's been kind of an evolving process as we're trying to figure out what is the best way to write objectives and post objectives and use objectives in our classrooms. It's changed. One of the things we wanted to do was simplify the process because we do not want you as teachers, and we've been classroom teachers too, get bogged down on your objectives. I've seen this happen. I train teachers on content and language objectives, and it was really overwhelming because it gets hard to figure out what's a content objective, what's a language objective. So we're not going to have that as a school-wide expectation. If you're comfortable and you want to, great. But a school-wide expectation, we really wanted to simplify it and streamline it so everybody could feel comfortable. Number one, we want our objectives to be standards-based. So what I've done here is I've grabbed a second grade standard from the Reading Common Core. And the first thing, step one, I'm going to teach you a real simple two-step process for writing objectives. Step one, just take that standard and write I can in front of it. So here's how I did it. I just took it, I kept all the language the same, I wrote I can, and then I wrote the whole standard. Okay? I don't know about you, but when I read that whole paragraph, I get a little overwhelmed, especially thinking this is for second grade. So step two, this is where you as the teacher comes in, and you have to know your students and what they can handle. Step two, if necessary, simplify the language so that it makes sense to your students. I'm going to throw something else in here for step two. because that standard, especially a lot of our reading standards, are so packed tight, like someone said in the last session, it's like a whole unit. Think about even breaking that standard apart. So what I did here is I just pulled up 2, and I didn't even write all the objectives, but I just showed how I could break it out in manageable chunks. I wouldn't teach this whole standard in one lesson. Maybe for a few days with my 2nd graders, I'm going to just work on, I can describe how the beginning of the story introduces the story, using that gradual release of responsibility. I'm going to model it, we'll do some guided, we'll do some shared, and then eventually I want them to be able to do it independently. Okay? So that's kind of the 2-step process. Number 1, write I can in front of your standard. Number 2, simplify the language and break it apart if you need. Okay? We're going to have you guys try it now. I pulled a 4th grade reading standard. It's determine the main idea of a text and explain how it is supported by key details. Summarize the text. We're not going to make you write it, but even if you just want to talk with a neighbor, just think about how you could use the 2-step process to write some objectives for this standard. Okay? We'll give you just a few minutes and then we'll share out. Go ahead and talk with your neighbors. Someone asked in the last class, and I thought this was a good idea, and I think Megan and we've talked about this. You can, sometimes you could post the whole standard, especially in 4th grade. Show them what the whole standard is. That's what you're working towards. But then you could have, if you wanted, this isn't a school-wide expectation to post the standard, but the next year you could have those I can statements and kind of show your students what they're working towards to get to this target, basically, is what I would call it. But there's lots of ways to do that, okay? All right, and then one more thing, or 2 more things we wanted to show you today is, you know, we hear a lot of talk about PLCs. That's been a big thing that was written into our school improvement plans in both schools. It was written into our SIG grant here at Kennedy. So just helping you guys see how these pieces fit together, we wanted to talk about how do objectives and PLCs go together. Well, if you think about it, objectives, the whole purpose of them is to focus your instruction. PLCs, the whole purpose of them is to be instructionally focused. That's been a shift for us because in the past we've had grade level meetings and all kinds of other meetings where things can happen. But a PLC isn't meant for that. A PLC, if you're really doing it well, needs to be instructionally focused. So in January, February, I think we introduced a new PLC agenda template to your PLC leaders. And that really stemmed from a conversation that had happened in December when Kennedy had our site visit from MDE. They were a little concerned about our PLCs maybe being instructionally focused properly. So we made a new template because we thought maybe the tool that we were using wasn't real conducive to what we were looking for. And so the new template has 4 main questions. So every PLC, these are the 4 questions that most of your conversation should be about. Number 1, what do we want our students to know? Number 2, how will we know that our students know this? Number 3, what will we do when our students don't know and understand? And number 4, what will we do when our students already know and understand? And here's just a glimpse of that new template. Some PLCs are already using it, some are just getting started, and that's okay. But I wanted to show you that as your PLC starts working with this template, the content objective comes under question number 1. When you're getting together as a 1st grade PLC or a 2nd grade PLC, you need to determine what is it we want our students to know. Think about that standard that you're working on. Again, maybe you'll focus on a reading standard or a math standard. And we're going to add on here, we didn't do this in January when we showed it to you PLC leaders. We want you here to state, what is that content objective? Put that I can statement right on your template. I know it's hard to read on your handout, and so if you haven't seen the new template, we did make some hard copies that you can grab on your way out today. But we wanted you to see how that fits together.
And just because I know our last group, they were talking that they thought the objective was, well, that's the objective for our meeting. The objective is, the PLCs are always about student learning. So the objective should be centered on student learning, not on your meeting. So there was some confusion there that we heard at the last.
Yep. And on March 19th, we are getting our PLC leaders together, and we'll clarify this because we're all new to PLCs, and we're all learning every day exactly what they need to look like. So they're constantly evolving and we're refining. So we'll communicate that to your leaders, and then they'll be sharing it within your PLCs too. Okay? All right.
Again, connecting something you're going to be asked to do with our PLCs, and again, they are focused on, when we're talking about our objectives, they're focused on content, and again, just so that you know that you are going to be asked to evaluate yourself, these are some things on the monitoring, assessment, and follow-up. You'll again look at what a 1 is, like you're giving tests and moving on without analyzing them. What we want is you to be in the 3 area, you're using that data, and these can all be things that happen during your PLCs. You're analyzing data right here, and you're reflecting. All of those are pieces that we want you to be looking at. If you have not had a chance to really look at what is all in your rubrics, something you might want to look at, because again, at the end of the year, you're going to be asked to evaluate yourself as well as administrators are going to be evaluating you. So something to look at. It is on the website. If you want to download it from the website, you can. I know that when we do our observations, you do get a 1 sheet. On the 1 sheet, we are listing each of the domains, and we're only listing 3s in there. So you don't get a chance to really see, well, what a 1, 2, or a 4 looks like. So if you want more information on that, it is on the website, or contact one of your administrators, and they will be happy to get that for you. So one area, again, that during your PLCs, and when we're focusing on learning, that we'll be looking at. And then we have one other area, and that is the area where we're talking about professional responsibilities. And again, being a team player, listening, collaborating, planning together, looking at teaching ideas, and working with your colleagues. Those are all areas that we're wanting. We want everyone to be in this 3 area. Again, if we're not doing that, we're defensive, and you're not meeting and things like that, you're not open to new ideas, you're going to have to score yourself as a 1, or your administrators will also see you. That's a conversation you will have together. So just be aware of these are all things that we can be working on together, and the real focus of all of this is student learning. That's the reason that we have the objectives. That's the reason that we have the evaluation piece, so that we can be reflecting on our own practice and trying to move ourselves forward as well as our students.
The ICANN.
As long as, right now the expectation is you have to have the ICANN.
Okay.
I threw that in there, maybe I shouldn't have it confused you, but I just wanted to share, because that had come up at the last session, what teachers had thought about. They wanted to have that for their kids. Bottom line is you need every day when you're teaching, you need your reading content objective and your math. That's the minimum.
And the question was, do you have to have your standard along with your objectives posted? And the answer to that is, we want the objectives posted. We just showed you that to show the relationship between the 2.